All right, good to see you.
Sorry, I've said you.
That's fine.
Sorry.
Right, let us come to the urgent question. Victoria Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Chancellor of the Exchequer what assessment she has made of the OBR's supplementary forecast information release on the costing of changes to agricultural and business property relief.
Minister Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at autumn budget, we took difficult decisions on tax, welfare and spending that were necessary to restore economic stability, fix the public finances and support public services. We had to do this to address the mess we inherited from the previous government, which the Right Honourable Member for Louth and Horncastle will remember well, having served in that ill-fated government. We have taken these decisions in a way that makes the tax system fairer and more sustainable. The government is better targeting agricultural property relief and business property relief to make them fairer. These reforms mean that despite the tough fiscal context, the government is maintaining very significant levels of relief from inheritance tax beyond what is available to others. Under the current system, the benefit of the 100% relief on business and agricultural assets is heavily skewed towards the wealthiest estates. According to the latest data from HMRC, 40% of agricultural property relief benefits the top 7% of estates making claims. That's just 117 estates claiming £219 million of relief. And it's a similar picture for business property relief, with more than 50% of business property relief being claimed by just 4% of estates making claims, which equates to 158 estates claiming £558 million in tax relief. Our reforms mean that individuals can access 100% relief for the first £1 million of combined business and agricultural assets and 50% thereafter. With the nil rate bans, this means a couple can pass on up to £3 million between them to a direct descendant, inheritance tax free. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the Office of Budget Responsibility published further details on the data sources and modelling used to estimate costings across a number of tax measured and outset budget. This included the reforms to agricultural property relief and business property relief. The costing is the same as published at budget, and the approach to modelling the costing is typical and in line with other tax policies. As the government has set out, these reforms mean that almost 3/4 of those estates claiming APR in 26-27, including those that also claim BPR, will not pay more inheritance tax. This is a fair approach that protects farms whilst also fixing the public services we all rely on.
Having inherited the fastest growing economy in the G7, the Chancellor's budget has led to the highest borrowing costs since the pandemic, growth flatlining, business confidence plummeting and job freezes. And who has Labour chosen to pay the price for their economic illiteracy? Pensioners, family businesses and farmers. For months, farmers, farming businesses, professional advisors and economists, and now 8 major supermarkets have warned the Chancellor that she has got her figures wrong. But ministers cleave desperately to their soundbites. Let us hope they listen to the OBR. Yesterday, the independent OBR released additional information about this particular measure. They reiterated the high uncertainty of the predicted yield. They noted that the yield of this measure is likely to be reduced by 35% because of behavioural responses, that it is unlikely to reach a steady state for 20 years, and expressed grave concerns about the impact on older individuals and their ability to plan. In short, the reassurances provided by ministers are falling almost as flat as the economy. Now, the Chief Secretary has lectured this House about the perils of sidelining the OBR. So, in light of this analysis, will the Minister now commit to a full and proper review of this dreadful policy? And the public have noticed that government ministers are failing to answer reasonable questions about their policies. Will the Minister therefore please give straight answers to the farmers and businesses watching this today? In light of this new analysis, how many farms does the Treasury think will be affected by changes to APR, BPR and BPR alone? What assessment has he made of the CAAV's findings that the Chancellor has underestimated the number of farms affected by this by a factor of 5? How many tenant farmers will be evicted. And as worrying reports of suicides amongst farmers begin to emerge, will he please do as the DEFRA Secretary has failed to do, which is measure the number of suicides over the next 12 months so that we can understand the human cost of this policy? And finally, Mr. Speaker, why does he think that Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, Morrison's, Marks and Spencer, Aldi, Lidl and Co-op all have come out against this tax policy and believe the Treasury's figures to be wrong? Why are they wrong and he thinks he's right?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But I think there may be some confusion on the benches opposite about what the OBR data shows, because the data which was published by the OBR yesterday refers to exactly the same costing as was published at budget. It sets out the approach to modelling and the costing, which is typical and in line with other tax policies. Indeed, the data referred to by the OBR makes clear in its statement the OBR's role is to provide independent scrutiny and certification of whether the government's policy costings are reasonable and central. And that's exactly what they've done in publishing this extra information showing the modelling behind the data that was published at the time of the budget. And indeed, the honourable member, the right honourable member, the shadow minister, asked questions about the data about the number of affected estates claiming APR and indeed APR BPR, some 530 as an upper estimate, are in table 1.1 of the OBR document published yesterday, which is consistent with what we have been saying for many months since the budget. And I think that one of the confusions on the benches opposite is to confuse the value of farms with the value of claims under inheritance tax. And the only way to truly understand the impact of changes to inheritance tax policy on inheritance tax claims is to look at the claims data itself. In terms of working with the retail sector and large supermarkets, we're working in partnership with the large supermarket chains to make sure they're driving economic growth. We're very clear that some of the decisions we had to take at budget were difficult decisions which will have consequences, but we're determined to work with businesses right across the country to drive economic growth, the number one mission of this government.
Shelbourne.
Mr. Speaker, the people of Newcastle Central and West love the local produce provided by local farmers in our fantastic markets, the Granger Market, for example, and enjoy the beautiful countryside of Northumberland shaped by generations of sustainable farming. But we cannot help but be aware that most of that land is owned by, for example, the Duke of Northumberland or big landowners and those seeking to minimise their tax exposure. So does the Minister agree with me that by keeping this loophole open for so long, the country has pushed up land prices and pushed out the next generation of young farmers?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her question, and there certainly is evidence that the current system in relation to inheritance tax has caused people to use these reliefs as a way of tax planning, of avoiding inheritance tax bills. And I think the broader question, which my honourable friend alludes to, is to do with the fairness of this measure and the sustainability. And as I mentioned in my earlier comments, Mr. Speaker, 40% of agricultural property relief benefits the top 7% of estates, 50% of business property relief benefits the top 4% of states. Now, I note that the Leader of the Opposition has said she thinks this is a good way to prioritise public money within the public finances, but we think it's not fair or sustainable.
We come to Liberal Democrat spokesperson Steve Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And after years of Tory failing of our rural communities, including a dodgy Australian trade deal that is utterly shameful, it is a great pity that the new government have picked up the baton from the Conservatives previously. I know from Orkney to the Isles of Scilly that Liberal Democrat colleagues are extremely concerned about the impact of these proposals. The report that was published yesterday clearly demonstrates that there is uncertainty over the next 2 decades of the income from these misguided family farm tax. So in light of this and the fact that it will be hitting older farmers particularly and impacting on those who put the food on the tables of the United Kingdom, will the Minister do the right thing and scrap this tax?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Office of Budget Responsibility document published yesterday refers to the level of uncertainty associated with this policy, and that is exactly the same as what was set out at the time of the budget. It's a typical way in which the OBR responds to new measures. It was set out at the time of the budget, and what was published yesterday simply reiterates their conclusions at the end of October.
Callum Anderson.
Does my honourable friend agree with me that once again the party opposite is failing to agree with the tough decisions that we have made, and they have no ideas about how to raise the revenue that will help finance the public services which will benefit rural communities like mine in North Buckinghamshire?
Minister.
Oh, my honourable friend is absolutely right that the party opposite, in fact the parties opposite, routinely support the spending and investment decisions we're taking as a government, but won't support any of the difficult decisions we have to take to fund them.
Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The weight of public and business opinion is not with the Minister on this issue. The body of expert opinion speaking out against this tax proposal is now overwhelming. Now, the Minister is a kindly man, so I wonder if you would just indulge me. If that weight of opinion was being expressed against a Conservative government Treasury policy and he was in opposition, what would he be saying?
I thank the honourable member for his question, and he is a kindly man as well. I know that outside of this chamber, I value the conversations he and I have been able to have. But I think what people looking at this policy, and in fact all of our policies we took at the budget, will recognise is that we had to take difficult decisions. They will understand the context in which we took difficult decisions of our inheritance from the previous government. We recognise the toughness of those decisions. We recognise that those decisions were not easy ones to have to take, but we prioritise balancing the public finances and economic stability, because that is how we get investment and growth, which our country so badly needs.
Mr Dixon, I think you were very late. I won't want to embarrass you by asking a question. We'll go to the Chair of the Select Committee, Alistair Carmack.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. One of the witnesses to the Select Committee told us that the changes hit the people they say they are protecting and protect the people they say they are hitting. It's difficult to improve on that as an analysis on what's proposed. But, Mr Speaker, it really doesn't have to be like this. There is a sensible debate to be had around the question of reforming inheritance tax that would stop the super-rich from sheltering their wealth while still protecting family farms. HMRC have their technical consultation coming up. Why doesn't the Minister agree to broaden the terms of that, engage with the farming communities, and to find out how we can find a way that actually does protect family farms and gets at those who are sheltering their wealth and land?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, the policy that we're implementing includes generous provisions to protect family farms, with the £1 million entire relief from inheritance tax for agricultural and business property assets. That's in addition to the existing nil rate bans that people can access as part of the general inheritance tax scheme. We think that strikes the right balance between making sure we raise money for the public finances and protecting family farms.
Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Have you noticed a pattern that on a Thursday, a Treasury Minister is asked to come to the Commons to answer an urgent question, and there's barely a soul on the Labour benches behind them when they do that?
I'm not quite sure that's relevant to the question you're going to ask, surely. Come on!
Specific to the Office for Budget Responsibility projections of the revenue that this measure raises, by 2029 they're forecasting £500 million, which is in the context of tax revenues that are over £1,150 billion, is a very small number. And what value does he put on food security for the United Kingdom?
He's asking the question.
Well, I thank the Right Honourable Member for her question. And obviously, as a government, we put the highest priority on food security, which is why our policies are setting out to support that and the farming sector more widely. This policy is one of many difficult decisions we had to take in the budget to balance the public finances, to support public services, and to provide the economic stability we need for investment and growth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I've heard from many farming businesses across Glastonbury and Somerton over the last few months. But one farm in Hercote near Somerton recently wrote to me to describe the anguish and stress the changes the APR and BPR have caused them. Like many farming businesses, their succession planning has focused on the primary landowner retaining the farm until death. How will the Minister explain to them that the potential loss of their family farm business is likely to have little impact on the public finances, according to the recent OBR report, and that it will hit our oldest farmers the hardest?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what the OBR publication yesterday sets out is the costings which were the ones set out at the October budget. So there is no difference between the costings set out in October and what the OBR set out yesterday. They simply set out more of the background behind how they calculated those costings for transparency, and so that people are aware. And they say in their report it's with an effort to improve the public debate by people understanding what is behind the data which was published at the time of the budget. You know, what's very clear is that this decision, as I said to several honourable members on the benches opposite, was one of many tough decisions we took at the time of the budget to balance the public finances. And we took this decision whilst making sure there is still greater protection from inheritance tax within the reform scheme that we're proposing than is available more widely.
John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Labour government's family farm tax is going to be catastrophic to farmers in my constituency in the Borders. I will be joining many of them and their tractors on Saturday in Kelso as the farming community comes together to show their displeasure and disapproval of this policy. But as farmers struggle to pay this tax, what assessment has the government made on the impact it's going to make on vets, feed merchant, machinery suppliers and all those other people who support the rural economy?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. And for us as a government, supporting the rural economy and supporting public services and investment right across the country is part of our national mission to get the economy growing. But in order to have that investment, in order to get the economy growing, the prerequisite is to have stable public finances. And without that economic stability, you cannot proceed to the investment and growth which we all so desperately need. And that is why this decision to reform, to target agricultural property relief and business property relief was taken alongside all the other difficult decisions we took at budget.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This measure is now revealed to be spectacularly ill-considered, and that's leaving aside the fact that it's also a breathtaking betrayal of farmers who were promised this wouldn't happen before the election. It places farmers on the same pedestal as speculative millionaires seeking to dodge tax by getting involved in farming instead of being intergenerational farmers. It's put an immediate brake on investment in farming. That threatens to lower yields and drive up food prices. That threatens inflationary pressures on the already perilous situation of the economy in the United Kingdom. And you cannot just agree with the OBR when it suits. The government must agree with the OBR regardless of what they're saying. So will the Minister please take this opportunity to respectfully pause and take some time to think about this and get something that will actually deliver for the Treasury, whatever that is, but not put our family farming sector under?
Mr. Speaker, there seems still to be on the opposition benches some confusion about what the OBR publication yesterday sets out. It reiterates the costings that were published at the budget on October the 30th. It's the same costings. It's explaining how those costings were arrived at so that people understand the calculations behind them. But the costings are the same as those which were published at the time of the budget.
Gerald Mayo.
Mr. Speaker, if you look at the Register of Interest, you'll see reference to my family farm in my constituency. And last Sunday, I drove one of our tractors to Fakenham Racecourse to support the farmers' protests against the agricultural property relief and BPR as well. Talking to other farmers, the key complaint was that there had been no consultation in advance of this, and there's no time for older farmers to adjust their affairs. And all of those concerns have been rubbished by ministers time and time again, and most recently today. Now the OBR confirms that it is more difficult for older people to restructure their affairs quickly. So will the government finally listen, show some humility and consult on how best to tackle the tax shelterers while still protecting our farmers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the comments in the OBR publication yesterday in relation to older individuals references a point which has been made since the budget in debates in this place and elsewhere. And we pointed to the fact that the way that we are reforming agricultural property relief and business property relief maintains generous exemptions from inheritance tax with £1 million full relief, the 50% relief beyond that, and of course the existing nil rate bans and other exemptions that already exist in the system.
Chair.
Much, Mr Speaker. Unusually in Scotland, tenant farms can be passed down via inheritance, and I've been asking the Treasury whether they've made an assessment of the impact of such farms, given that they cannot sell land to meet the APR liability that they might face. The answer so far appears to be none. So can I ask the Minister, is he aware of the 1991 agricultural tenancies? Has he made an assessment of the impact and can give me that answer at the dispatch box?
Well, Mr Speaker, the way in which to calculate the impact of changes to inheritance tax policy is to look at the inheritance tax claims that are made, and that is what we've used as the basis for our calculations. And in fact, the OBR publication yesterday confirms the use of data that HMRC has on inheritance tax relief in the past and inheritance tax projected forward, and that is the basis on which we have designed our policy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Now, the Minister has just confirmed that the Treasury's modelling is based on APR and APR joint BPR claims. But the evidence given by tax experts to the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee said that many family farms will wrap their agricultural land into a single business property relief claim. So the Treasury's modelling does not take into account family farms who have used a BPR-only claim, it doesn't take into account tenant farmers who use BPR, and it doesn't take into account the many rural family businesses that will also use BPR. So will the Minister please take this opportunity, look at this again before his government wrecks the countryside?
Mr Speaker, as I set out in my earlier remarks, the need for reforming business property relief is as strong as the need to reform agricultural property relief in order to have stable public finances and have a fair and sustainable tax system. As I set out in my earlier remarks, 40% of APR relief goes to the top 7% of estates, 50% of BPR goes to the top 4% of estates. Now, in particularly given the fiscal context that we inherited, that kind of unfairness is not sustainable. And when we want to balance the public books, we need to make sure that we are looking at the tax system and developing it in a way which is sustainable and gives us economic stability we so desperately needed after the mess the previous government left us.
John Milne.
Mr Speaker, farmers have made their inheritance tax plans in good faith based on existing rules. In effect, this measure is a retrospective change in tax law. So will the Minister agree to, at the very least, delay implementation until the effects are properly understood both for farmers and the government?
Mr Speaker, the Government is committed to delivering the reforms announced at budget. We've considered carefully the impact that they will have and designed the policy in a way that provides generous exemptions from inheritance tax for small family farms and businesses, whilst making sure that we balance the public finances in as fair as possible a way.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In light of the OBR's report and the uncertainty within it, does the Minister still believe that this is a good policy, considering that uncertainty, considering that this policy is going to hit elderly farmers the hardest, considering that it's going to put food security at risk, considering that it's going to be the rural communities that suffer the most, given its impact on tenants and young farmers, and given its impact on the wider agricultural sector? Does he really still believe in this policy?
Mr Speaker, the honourable member refers to a degree of uncertainty. The degree of uncertainty which the OBR alluded to in what they published yesterday is exactly the same as what they said at the time of the budget. The costing is exactly the same as what they published at the time of the budget. The information they published yesterday provides more information about how this costing was arrived at, but the costing itself, the degree of uncertainty, the calculations which are made remain exactly the same as they did at budget.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister has just referred to those key words, balancing the public finances, from all of these measures. And yet we've just had the latest debt figures out for December that show that they are 20% higher than the OBR expected just 2 months previously. At what point will the Minister and the Government recognise they've got this badly wrong and change course?
Mr Speaker, we recognise that when the party opposite were in government, they got it badly wrong and the country decided to change course, which is why they elected us into government to fix the public finances, put our public services back on their feet, boost investment and get the economy growing.
Lincoln John.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. They say that you ought to build your enemy a golden bridge. And in the compromise and pause proposed by the NFU, I think that is a very elegant solution. That golden bridge is now being signposted by Tesco, by Aldi, by Lidl, by the Co-op, by all the major retailers the Minister claims to be engaging with. Why doesn't he just take a pause, go back, listen and review this policy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I set out in an answer to a previous question, the government is committed to delivering the reforms announced at budget. They were carefully calibrated to retain generous inheritance tax exemptions whilst making sure that we balance the public finances in as fair as possible a way.
Thanks, Wilkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bent's Builders Merchants in my constituency has been providing good local produce and good local jobs since the Earl of Aberdeen was on the throne. The owner, Paul Bents, now fears that the combination of business property relief changes alongside ENICs means that there is a huge disincentive to invest further. Does the Minister share my constituents' concern?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising his constituents' concerns, and without knowing the specifics of the case that he raises, I know that more broadly, investment decisions are dependent on, above all else, a stable economy and stable public finances. And without doing the hard work that we've done since taking office to fix the public finances and to bring back economic stability, that investment would be hampered and our growth ambitions would not materialise in the way that we are determined to make sure happens.
Cool.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. The situation appears to be that there is a rally on Saturday. The Minister perhaps imagines that this is acclamation for his policy. I can assure him, we've heard earlier in the week from the Honourable Member for Falkirk and today from the Honourable Member for Newcastle Central, both well-known rural areas, that this is all about the landed estates and wealthy people. The farmers I will speak with in Castle Douglas on Saturday are tenant farmers. They are family farmers. Their farms they face being put off that land after generations. Is the Minister really telling me I should go to them and say to them they've nothing to worry about?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to tell the honourable gentleman what he should say to his constituents, but what I can tell him about the government policy on this is that we have preserved generous inheritance tax reliefs for people in the situations that he described, and I would encourage anyone who's concerned about this to seek advice to understand exactly how the new rules might apply to them.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sometimes absolutely flummoxed, I think we probably all are, by the Chancellor's intent to tax a working family farm, which we all know will result in the loss of the small farm, sale of the land, reduction in food security, and now it seems that the OBR agrees that it won't make savings. So will the Minister commit to meeting with Cabinet colleagues urgently to remove the sword of Damocles which is hanging above small family farms and also hurting the agri-food sector as a whole? Can I say, Minister, there's a way forward. The way is to increase the threshold from 1 million to 5 million, and family farms will be saved.
Yeah.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, but I think his question was again based primarily on the OBR publication yesterday, and I reiterate the point I've made several times now, that the OBR publication yesterday reiterated the costings and the figures set out at budget. It reiterated the level of uncertainty which was associated with the measure as published at budget. It provides more detail behind that, but the conclusion of it is the same as it was on October the 30th.
Alistair Carmichael, point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before questioning the Minister, I should have reminded the House of my own entry in the register of members' interest. My failure to do so, for which I apologise, was inadvertent. I just got carried away with the excitement of the moment.
Thank you for that wonderful clarification. Right, that completes.